Hello, everyone. We are really happy that you've joined us for this webinar today. Our topic is does your C-suite, the team of executives at your organization, do they really understand the value of your global learning efforts? And so we look forward to a wonderful conversation. Just a few housekeeping things. There is a Q&A box that you can put your questions in, or if you like, you can put it right in chat. And the way we like to do webinars is we like to answer people's questions or address their comments as they come in. So rather than waiting all the way till the end, which is sort of uninteresting, we like to answer them in the moment. And plus, I sort of enjoy finding out how our panelists think on their feet. And so we're excited. We'll get to introductions of our panelists in just a bit, but let's we want to give a little introduction to Ingenuiti and what we do. We are dedicated to delivering measurably better solutions that bridge the training and cultural gaps that we find, and our goal is to enable our clients to thrive in an interconnected world, and we do that three ways. So at the top there, you'll see custom learning design. We do learning design all over the world, for very large companies, for very large nonprofits. Bottom left circle is translation and localization. That is actually the origin of our company. We have, in the last 10 years, translated more than 1 billion words, and we translate into 200 different languages in addition to localization services. And then we also provide staff augmentation services. We've done that for a long time. We've placed thousands of people in companies all over the place, focused primarily on learning. And so instructional designers, graphic designers, project managers in some cases, animators, and so on. And so those are our three solutions, and a quick introduction to us. So let's get to the far more interesting part, right? Let's introduce our panelists. And so, Brandon, since you are on the left on my screen, would you mind giving a little bit of your work history and your current role?
Yes, thank you, Jerry. It's great to be here. I look forward to our conversation today. So Brandon Carson, I'm currently the Global Head of Learning, Leadership, and Cultural Experiences at Starbucks in sunny Seattle today. And hopefully everyone's having some coffee, just like I am. But I have been in L&D for 20 plus years now, and spent the first half of my career in tech, second half of my career in retail, with a little segue over to the airline industry, which was fun until COVID hit. Then it wasn't so much fun. And back on the West Coast with Seattle, or with Starbucks in Seattle. So loving every minute of it.
Great. And thank you for your time and for your expertise and your willingness to share it, most importantly. Jerry, give us a bit of your background, if you would.
So, Jerry Kaminski, I'm here up in right now sunny Dearborn, Michigan at Ford headquarters. I'm Global Learning Operations Manager for the Globe and all our L&D functions. Like Brandon, I've been in the L&D field, I hate to say this, but 43 years. I started out as an instructional designer in the Navy. They've held every known position, I think, in instructional design, all the way up through a chief learning officer, and took some early retirement out of an auto supplier years ago, and ended up back here at Ford helping launch our new employee orientation program and other programs like that.
Great.
6-time winner of the ATD Best Award, and have been on the ATD Forum as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. And as with Brandon and Jerry, thank you very much for your time today and for sharing your wisdom and experience. Miriam.
Sure. So I'm Miriam Taylor. I'm the Client Success Manager here at Ingenuiti, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with Brandon and Jerry today. My background also is in instructional design, and spent a lot of years doing everything in the trenches, and then eventually leading a team all the way up through VP of Learning, and then worked with Jerry for a long time, and Today, my main job really is to be a solutions architect, to work with our clients, make sure they have the right solution in between them and our learning team. And then the fun part, or extra fun part of my job is hosting webinars, podcasts, writing articles. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Miriam. Always appreciate the partnership that I have with you. My name is Jerry Zandstra. I have been in learning, training, and development in some form or another for more than 30 years. I think Miriam and I have worked together for close to 15 years, and so it's my joy and my honor to lead the learning development team at Ingenuiti. So our topic for today, lady and gentlemen, is an interesting one and not a particularly easy one to address. It is communicating the value of learning to people who, to be perfectly frank, often don't know how learning is created. They don't know where it comes from, and they are not used to this world. So how do you communicate value to people who don't live and work in this particular industry? And so, Jerry, I'll start with you. What challenges have you seen in creating learning and training and development?
So I think the biggest challenge I've seen, and maybe Brandon will second it, is that we speak a different language than business leaders. So part of our role is to be the translator. So when we do take it to the C-suite, we're talking in terms of, dollars and cents and annual reports. We're not telling them butts and chairs or a number of training courses we developed. It's equating not only the training we're doing, but the engagement of the employees as well as the change in their behavior to the benefit of the company.
And that transition, it's interesting. Miriam and I have been to a number of conferences, and we noticed a long time ago that the sessions, the little breakout sessions that are always packed, are often around this subject. What's the return on investment? What's the return on learning? What's the value? How do you communicate that? And that tells us that this is not an easy topic, and not quickly done. Brandon, how about your experience?
Yeah, I agree with what Jerry said, that you have to be that translator to a certain extent. But we look at it a little differently at Starbucks. We have a unique culture here, and we were having this conversation with some ELT not too long ago, and they were talking about the persistence and consistency of the culture across the globe. We operate in 87 countries, and they were pondering, like, how does the culture in all these different contexts around the world stay so consistent? And our answer was through training. And so training drives the unique culture in a lot of ways. We believe a competent workforce is a confident workforce. Confidence means connection in a lot of ways. So there are many different lenses to look through when it, beyond just the value in sort of dollars and cents. And, I do know that that's where all learning leaders need to be pretty fluent in understanding the impact and cost of things. But the value proposition for training is well understood by our leaders. We consistently correlate learning to our core values and to our culture. It drives our culture. But, like you said, it is challenging to hone in sometimes. It's easy to get the number of maybe employee time spent in training, the cost of that, labor hours, all of that. That's not difficult. What's really critical for us in today's world, I believe, as a practice, is to gather evidence of the impact to the business and to the employee from training. So it's not just about activity. Each hour spent in training needs to bring value. And how do you display that value? How do you bring forth evidence of that value? We're looking at flipping the narrative, if you will, from time spent in training to value extracted from training. And though it seems like a little bit of a nuance, and as learning leaders, we have to be fluent in cost and all of that analysis involved in that, and sensitive to the labor hour, all of that. But we also have to have that added lens, if you will, of demonstrating through evidence what that value is that comes from that. And that flips the narrative from how do we reduce training time to how do we ensure that we're getting the most value from that.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting distinction. The easiest thing, as you said, is to report activity.
Mm-hmm.
But activity does not translate into value. And so making that transition, right, and doing that translation is essential. Miriam, I'm going to ask you to address the next slide. So Miriam and I, in thinking about what we wanted to address today, we thought about the challenge in two ways. One is playing defense, and of course, the next slide will say playing offense. But playing defense first, and Miriam, I'm thinking back the number of clients that you and I have worked with over the years who felt an enormous amount of pressure to constantly play defense. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, Brandon, I appreciate really the culture that's being created there. And one of the, to echo that, one of the words that I've started to, I think, message with my clients, because a lot of times, we're obviously a vendor, but we come alongside clients. And so, to your point, Jerry, we're trying to help them message things. And we started talking about what is your investment. So it's not a cost, but if you are, as a company, investing in this training, yes, we can prove ROI, but also, to your point, Brandon, we're helping keep culture. We're helping tie everything back to organizational values and making sure there's consistency. But to answer your question, Jerry, yeah, I mean, some of our earliest clients, and even to this day, I think historically, as someone that has been sort of in the trenches, when we develop learning materials, we're excited about them and we create them, and we don't always spend a lot of time thinking about, we feel pressure to defend them, but we don't necessarily think about how to do that. And so, or if we do, we sort of have anecdotal stories about how this is great, or I can pull numbers from my LMS that show how many people took it. But instead of thinking up front, how am I going to demonstrate, the value across lots of different levels? And again, to learn to speak more of that C-suite language, that financial language, or the higher level corporate language of alignment to values and alignment to organizational goals for that year.
And that's challenging. It's challenging to do. I for those of you who have just joined us in the last few minutes, as you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat. You can put them in the Q&A box too, but we won't save them up to the end. We'll engage with hopefully your good and thoughtful insights as we go. Brandon and Jerry, you can affirm or deny the following statement, but I think both of you have been around long enough. I certainly have, to know that when the economy turns, historically, and I've taught economics and global business for many years, historically, the two portions where layoffs begin when a company begins to struggle or an organization begins to struggle is marketing and learning. And I suspect the reason is because your marketing goodwill will carry forward for a long time. So Coca-Cola could go a year without Starbucks could too, Ford can too. You could go a long time without marketing anything and no one's going to forget who you are. And so I think that decision, and the other is, well, we've invested in learning, we've got some assets, we can keep using those things. And so we often see economic downturn equals layoffs. Are you seeing the same?
I can jump in. I had a stint several years ago at Apple, and Steve used to talk about sort of the peaks and valleys that all companies go through. And his perspective during, we were in a valley, right? And his perspective was, this is the time to actually invest more in human capital, because one, there's always going to be a peak. So it's peaks and valleys. So good times, bad times, right? But when the good times come back, you're ready. Yeah. Right. And we saw some of this manifest itself during COVID, because I worked at Delta Airlines during COVID. And of course, we were in a crisis. So it maybe doesn't maybe it's not 100% correlation. We were in the world was in a crisis, right? And as an airline, we were putting the business to rest. And so we were asking for, we didn't actually do any layoffs at Delta, but we were asking for people to take leaves of absences, take early retirements, all these sorts of things just to help it. We were actually doing job matching for other companies, that kind of stuff to make sure that we could transition the workforce. But then the business came back when COVID started in decline. The business came back really abruptly and fast, and faster than we expected, which led to some of the, you know, challenges we saw in that industry. So, I mean, there's different ways of thinking. You're right. It's like easy to sort of look at just cost reduction across. HR, L&D historically takes a big hit there.
Yeah.
But a lot of it too is just sort of what is your strategy when it comes to talent? And COVID showed us, the tech tsunami is showing us that it's not so easy nowadays to make those decisions, because it can directly impact your, you know, your value in the marketplace when you get rid of or when you lose brain trust, right? And so I think you're right that we have to have defense there, like as L&D. And one company I worked at, we gathered data that showed if we were to reduce employee attrition by just 1%, we would save the business over 100 million a year.
Right.
So I think that's where we need to become fluent in the cost and impact of the trade-offs that business decides to make in those peaks and valleys, right? So you can leverage that metric or those metrics, correlate them to business KPIs. Like I said in the chat, if you're doing training not connected to a KPI, you should really question why you're doing it. But I think we become more data informed and data fluent, if you will. That helps our case when, you know, these people come calling, right, with the financial hits that may come.
Right. Thank you. I'm just realizing I was way behind in the chats. There's a lot of comments here, and we appreciate that.
I was going to add too, you know, the secret to playing defense, and I'll use a football analogy, don't wait for the turnover. I went through a large downturn at the supplier I worked for back in 06, 07. We went from 18,000 to 9,000 employees in 3 months. We didn't lose a single person in L&D because we had been doing metrics and analytics for many years before that. We were benchmarking against the state of the industry, and we had every known financial metric around learning and development. We presented it every quarter to the senior team, and our staff was actually well below what our metrics should have been for that too. So when they start looking at where to go, they realize if we cut any more out of training, we're going to be crippled. And as it turned out, we didn't lose a single person.
Yeah,
when the
that's
industry
impressive.
came back, we actually grew the team, and we were way ahead of the curve. And we almost doubled our learning the first quarter after the downturn. So
that is not
wait
typical.
to play defense.
Yeah, not excellent point. Laura, you bring up a good point. You could push back from L&D leader when you talk about trying to create a business metrics, because in their words, training cannot claim 100% of the result.
Right.
I would say no one can claim 100% of the result. You determine your KPIs, you agree that they are statistically meaningful, and then you show how they change over time. You're looking at trend lines over a period of time, rather than just a snapshot. Yeah, Brian, one important thing a learning professional can start with is a best estimate of how much a point of turnover costs in their business. That's a great one to begin with, because attrition, and I mean, we work in some industries, and Brandon, you certainly see this in retail. The turnover rate in some of our clients is like 175% a year. My goodness. You know, how do you handle that?
Yeah. So with heavy attrition, you know, like that, which is not, you know, like you said, a lot of retail companies have this. You want to make sure that speed to competency is a key measurable component of what you're trying to solve for. If you let's say if you spend a couple of weeks training an employee that's going to maybe be there 11 months, what are you doing? You're fire hosing, first of all, to get a lot of information into someone's head to be able to serve the needs of the customer. You just got to figure out, how do you transfer as much of that as possible to learning in the flow of the work, and how much do you really need focus on at the start of their tenure at the company, and
Yeah.
then how do you sort of bridge those seams or close those gaps in the experience to try to reduce that attrition. But I think understanding and being aware of the attrition is key.
Right.
And that's one metric I would push back a little on. Yes, we can't claim 100% of that, but L&D is where you can impact that first year to 18 months of an employee experience really significantly, probably more so than most other functions, maybe not as much as the manager, the direct manager, but really getting equivalent to that. And because employees need to feel like, again, going back to, if they're competent, they're more confident. If they're more confident, then they can perform. And so I think that's the tyranny of retail in some respect, is how do you speed up competency and feeling competent and confident so that they can feel good in the job. That's the number one.
And very different. We're gonna go on to playing offense, but while we do that, I think very different, Jerry, from you. I would imagine much of your workforce is long term.
Yes.
In some place like Gold Watch, long term, right? Came in at 22 and retired at 60.
We have a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about playing offense. Playing offense is more fun than playing defense. Jerry, you played football. What were you, offense or defense?
Offense. I was a fullback.
Oh, there we go. See, playing offense is way more fun. Making the argument for budget increases. It's not just that you're trying to protect. You're trying also to expand, and you're trying to grow your capacity, grow your team, grow your technology. What have you two seen in making the argument for the budget increase?
I'm gonna say, I mean, it's really a lot of work, and it goes back to, and we've talked about it, but it's the metrics, and it's the second and third tier metrics. So, like we said, we can't take credit for everything, but what we've found is things like looking at, attrition. If I run the new employee orientation program, we're looking at how many new hires do we get, how many go through new hire orientation, how many are still within the company a year from now or 2 years. So is the attrition, can we correlate it to that training? We've also seen it, I did this years ago when I did a leadership program, not only the attrition rate of the leaders, but what was the attrition rate of the people reporting to those leaders and the promotability of the people reporting. So you can start getting into second tier design, and then you start looking, okay, so we put together this training program. It's $50,000, but we just saved the company $1 million. So you got to constantly look at how do you equate that money to the leaders for the spend, but at the same time also look at that change in their behavior and return on investment, or return on their ability. And the thing I think everybody's chasing now, and we're chasing, is what's the speed to proficiency. We want people hired day one. Our fight right now at an auto company is trying to get people that have EV experience. There's just not a lot of people out there. So you got to figure out, how do you train them up to speed with batteries and EV production? So it's speed to, if I'm losing money or I'm losing people to the competitors, it's easy to say, if we had this thing, but it's an age old, you're going to chase it all the time in L&D. It's just, part of the job.
Yep. Yeah. David has a quick question. What's your view of time scale, and how long do you continue to measure a business outcome after something's been released?
With the analytics and the systems we use nowadays, forever.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I assumed. Well, we're gonna get into some tips, right? Some very pragmatic things. Some of these we've sort of touched on. The very first one is aligning with organizational and financial goals. And honestly, Miriam, I'm going to ask you to jump in here, because sometimes we work with clients and we say to them, we need to talk about value add. We need to talk about, and they're not really particularly interested in the big picture of organizational and financial goals, because they have a deadline. And again, a lot of people on this webinar right now are sitting there thinking, I should be doing something else, right? Because I have this pressing deadline. And so the goal is to kind of crank things out, and not actually, and I think this is where the learning leader plays a key role, to always be thinking about connecting and alignment. So address that for a moment, if you would, Miriam.
Yeah, I think you hit on, the major issue for the teams we work with is tyranny of the urgent. And, if they're doing their job correctly, it's always really important to, when a project is presented to your team, to ask why and to kind of dig at that, to do a needs assessment, because we all know that whenever there's a problem, it's usually, well, let's do some training. Well, no, let's take a step back and make sure that that's the correct solution for
Right.
this problem and there aren't other issues involved. But that being said, there's not always a choice, right? You have to do that. If you're presented, you have to create, whatever learning experiences you need to create. And so I think it is easy to kind of forget to look at, unless it's an obvious pressing, there's a compliance issue or something like that, we know exactly how that ties to our organizational or financial goals, or like you guys were talking about earlier, retention and that sort of thing. So I think that every learning and development professional wants to think about these things. It's just that there's a tyranny there, there's a pressure. And so sometimes it becomes the learning leader's job is to say, hold on a second, let's just, because sometimes it's not even a matter of, we know what those are, but we also need to sort of gather consensus within the group about what is our main goal here, what is the main organizational goal or financial goal we're trying to align with, because that really is going to steer the ship as we start to develop these learning experiences.
Well, and it's interesting, particularly for those of you who work for large organizations, right? If you work for a privately held company, sometimes it's hard to know what the organizational goals are or the financial goals are because the shareholders don't always share those things. But in a publicly traded company, you have quarterly and annual reports. I mean, people are, the C-suite is laying out, here's what matters to us. Here are the things that are important to us. And so Jerry and Brandon, Jerry, let's start with you. How much do you pay attention to organizational and financial goals of the overall of Ford, which are large and substantial? How much do you try to make that connective tissue?
Daily.
Really?
We like I said, we do new employee orientation. We talk about organizational goals and financials to all our new employees coming in day one. We do monthly town halls with the CEO down. So everybody understands, especially in automotive, as much as you're an annual company, you're only as good as Wall Street looks at the next 90 days. So financials are always forefront in terms of profitability. You hear our CEO talk all the time about, right now, EVs are all startup companies, with the exception of Tesla. Most of the companies doing EVs are losing money because they're startups.
Right.
So that's key. But the organizational goals are important. But you have to look at the structure. I look at us. We're a federated model across 130 countries, and it's interesting when you look at alignment of organizational goals. One of the things we're working on, and our mantra with our team is, we're developing things that are global, but then we localize them. So we want a global impact, but we localize it because it is different from country to country or organization to organization. So they're forefront every day.
Okay. Brandon, that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, it does. I would say that a couple of these things conflated, right? So just to go back to a little bit of the idea of reducing investment, especially in volatile times such as this, we have to be very careful about this getting normalized, right? And from my perspective, we have a capability crisis on our hands. And Jerry kind of touches on it a bit when look at the transition that the auto industry is trying to make, right? The transition a lot of us are trying to make as more jobs are being looked at through the lens of automation and intelligence, right? And so we know over the next decade, companies are going to spend anywhere from $1 trillion plus in AI-related CapEx, for example. So the implementation of these intelligent work systems will continue. And so this capability crisis sits firmly on our shoulders. And so part of the alignment, if you will, to the organizational financial goals, yes, but candidly, I was talking to Mark Ramos, the former Cornerstone CLO, a couple months ago, and we were talking about this seat at the table that L&D is always arguing for, right? And he responded and said, you know what, we are the table.
Oh, wow.
So I love that. Yeah, that's great.
We're actually setting the table now. And so in many instances, the CPO or the CLO are often more challenging to get right in role than the CEO. And so in our business environment today, we have to operate with more agility. We have to address things quickly. Emerging needs are always happening. Unplanned business activity. So when we talk about business goals and alignment, sure, but we actually need to be in front of that a little, because if you look at this $1 trillion being spent on CapEx, not many CEOs are asking, do I even have the capability in the workforce to execute strategies across all of this investment in intelligence and automation? They just expect training to make it happen. And
Right.
so I think this is where we've got to start really diagnosing and prescribing in a much more agile fashion to do the reskilling and upskilling necessary for us to keep our strategic advantages as we move into these kind of unknown areas, which will have unintended consequences as well. So we have to be in front of it a little, which is really challenging in our organizational structures. And sometimes we're cost centers and we're not really equipped to be the table, but we are the table, and we need to recognize that, and we need to have that perspective going forward.
So Brandon, I just trademarked "We Are the Table." I'll be selling T-shirts with that on it in about 20 minutes.
That is Mark Ramos. So
I want that one.
I don't want to know where it came from. I just trademarked it. So, all right. Well, let's move on to another best practice. This has been an excellent discussion. On to communication plans. This has been woven through our entire conversation, that we need to communicate. And Jeff, you're just jumping in here, right? If we clearly communicate, that communication piece is enormously important, because you can't do this annually. Jerry, you're saying you can't even do this quarterly, right? This has to be far more intense. And so what communication tools, you've described some, but what kind of frequency and how do you communicate with the C-suite, people who at the end of the day are making budgetary decisions?
We go across all channels, whether it's email, videos, WebEx, town halls, elevator chats when you bump into somebody. You're always trying to sell. We're on the sales side of the business. I've always told instructional designers and people working in training, every chance you get, communicate what we do, why we do it, and how we do it, so that we have an allyship of all the people. Because I think somebody put a thing out about, we're always order takers. Well, order takers can be the first to go, because you're not looking at the,
Where's the value in that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jeffrey, that's to your point, where L&D needs to improve is to understand our businesses better.
Last year, our CEO came out at one of our town halls and said, everybody thinks that Ford is a manufacturer and a car company. He goes, our business is service and software. We make more money from that now than the manufacturing process. So talk about, understanding the organizational change.
Yeah, Brian, I like your comment too about aligning with aligning with marketing, right? To be able to create messages. Brandon, comments on how do you communicate?
Yeah, well, the one time in my career that I had this direct correlation with marketing was at Apple, because I was in sales training and we reported up to marketing. And that was actually a really great kind of connection, if you will, in that it's a company that was heavy on brand and messaging and market, those kinds of the language. And our philosophy was we wanted to carry that through training, especially in sales training, when we're trying to, a key priority is to stay on brand with the product messaging. So that, that is, and sometimes candidly, it, to use Miriam's word around tyranny, the tyranny of our organizational structure of where we sit can sometimes preclude us from being directly connected to the rhythms of the business and what's going on. And so one key thing we have here is we are connected to our enterprise comms organization. And so we see training, we see the work we do is directly connected to, correlated to, and visible to our customers. And so we see that as really not a byproduct of something we're doing. It's actually, like I said earlier on, part of our culture, part of our brand, if you will. And so it's very important that we are connected in a way that makes the most sense, not just from a administrative or logistics kind of thing, but that we're actually a part of the rhythm of that.
Yeah, Pablo, you made there it is. Pablo, you made an excellent point that there's you see two different types of work for L&D. One is interacting with the HR team, of course, and then the other is communicating with the rest of the company. I would say oftentimes people in our industry do very well inside the HR function and less well in the overall. Let's move on to a trickier question. And Miriam, I'm going to ask you to address this one. This is an age-old conflict, right? Quantitative versus qualitative. I'm a numbers guy, and so I think most human emotion can be expressed on a spreadsheet. Right, Miriam, you know this. I mean, you and I worked together a long time, right? Mm-hmm. Pictures become clear not for me when they're pictures, but when they're numbers. My strong sense is that L&D leaders are far more qualitative than they are qualitative. What? Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, well, I would say certainly, I mean, especially after listening to Brandon and Jerry here, I think that there is obviously like a huge understanding, I think, at the higher levels of the quantitative data that needs to be pulled and needs to be presented. And we've talked a lot about return on investment and that kind of thing. But I think still probably at maybe an individual contributor or like a small team L&D level, there's still more of that emphasis on qualitative. But I also want to make the argument that qualitative is powerful as well. And so, but it's a matter of being prepared with both. I mean, obviously it's not the point of this webinar, right? But we can look at all different evaluation metrics. We go clear back to like Kirkpatrick way back in the day and other much more measurable and different. You know, we have to look at both measures, but I would be interested in hearing from Jerry and Brandon too, like, what do you see as, I wouldn't say most powerful, but like, how do you combine both of those and how do you find, like, what ways do you find to be most effective when you're interacting with the C-suite and kind of presenting those measures?
That was going to be my question. So,
okay, there we go.
Brandon, we'll start with you. What mix do you use? And you know, so you guys are both very active in communicating. What are you communicating? Is qualitative, quantitative, or a combination?
Yeah, so we have a combination of both, and you're right, there's tension because, and I like to say we're data informed as a practice, we're not data driven, because being we look at performance through the lens of humanity, if you will. So there are more anecdotal measurements, if you will, that do inform how we do what we do. We have a lot of experiential things around onboarding, around culture, but you really have to be at both. And how it works for organizations or functions that are in cost center mode, in a lot of ways, I correlate it to what we had in the airline industry. So my team was responsible for safety training. You would think safety training is the most important, safety is the most important thing for an airline, right? And obviously safety training is way up there.
Please don't say it's not, because I'm flying in a few weeks. Yeah,
it's way up there, right? It's the number one thing, right?
Thank you.
The reason it works so well, in that it is the safest form of transportation that we have, is because the majority of making it safe is built into the actual systems themselves, right? And then the human component is always where the trouble starts, because we're humans and we're messy, and that's just how it is. So I think that's a lot of our problem in L&D, because we have messiness from humans, and we're literally doing and conducting the hardest thing you can do across the enterprise, and that's to gauge and measure human behavior and even changing human behavior. Hardest thing you'll ever try to do, right? Yep. So I have what I call balanced scorecards, right? And there's two dimensions to this. The scorecard has the dimension for our practice as L&D. So, and there's three sort of key areas there: productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness. Like, how are we, how do we measure for our L&D team our ability to execute to the goals, right? How do we measure our efficiency as a team in delivering on those goals? And then what is our effectiveness as a team operating with the business across the enterprise? So I think that's important, and to our earlier conversation, that's really for us to get right, so that we're practicing as a value add to the enterprise. It's not necessarily, you spend a lot of time with business people with that kind of stuff. They don't really care about that. They just want you to be a good practice. The second dimension is that what I've talked about earlier, correlating to business KPIs. And so if you're not correlating to business KPIs, then you probably shouldn't be working on it. Like, what are those KPIs? And that's where you have to find that that evidence of your impact. And that's how you have to bring that to life in your dashboard or your storytelling, however you bring that evidence forward.
Right.
And if you're not being asked as the learning leader or the learning team to show evidence of that impact, then that's where you have to start thinking, like, am I just the order taker doing activity, right? The business should be very interested in what you're doing because you're taking time and, you know, all of these things from the workforce. So how are you managing to that in your playbook and all of that? So those are the two dimensions that I keep pretty active.
And now you're in a scenario where you're truly teaching the C-suite to understand. And
you're influencing your stakeholders, because everybody knows training, because everybody can think of training as a thing that they know about, you know. But to your earlier point, when you started out, not everyone knows how we make the sausage, and it's vitally important that you are an evidence-based function, and that you are data informed, and that you understand the causation, you understand root cause, and you can go to that conversation with leaders so that it demonstrates not only the complexity and complications of changing human behavior, but we actually had this conversation not too long ago about the difference between communication and training across the enterprise. So, which is kind of, to me, a basic thing, but not to everyone. So that's where you're influencing the use of language. To me, it's black and white. If there's behavior change necessary, it's training. If not, it's not training. So it's pretty black and white, but not a lot of people get that difference and that understanding there.
So you lead in perfect to my radicalness. I agree. It's both qualitative and quantitative. As an L&D professional, I like to look at the qualitative data for my input to what I want to do. Quantitatively, I've got two takes on it. So working with marketing people, they're very keen on NPS scores. And NPS is really not a learning score per se, but they love it. So I use that as one of my metrics for quality. But I've become a radical the last 10 or 15 years. When I do survey data, I do yes or no answers. No more Likert, no more 1 through 5. Because at the end of the day, is 2.4 any better than 2.6? So I write my survey questions for my qualitative as yes or no. Either you can do it or you can't do it. And if you can't do it, why?
Interesting.
And it gets a much better conversation at the C-suite, because now they're saying, well, you know, you get people want to crunch numbers. You know, my wife's very big on using quantitative data for restaurants and travel. And if you look at most of the data, it's a perfect bell curve. 3% love it, 3% hate it, 94% are in the middle halfway. So let's just go yes or no. And then if we've got a majority that are in the yes category, we know we're doing something right. And if we've got a group or even minute numbers in the no, let's look at how to fix those. So like I said, I'm a radical when it comes to scoring. And I have this ongoing debate all the time with my analytics people, my IO psych people, like, you can't do that. Like, watch me. And I've been doing it for years and it works well. And like I said, then I look at those numbers and I look at the qualitative data and I can read behind the scenes of what's causing or driving that.
Right.
So it's an age-old. That's why I say playing offense is, you know, doing that almost on a daily basis.
Scott, you've made an excellent point. How would you recommend bridging the gap between different executives, maybe in the C-suite, but there could be VPs and directors? Scott, let's go on to the Scott West. Let's go on to the next slide, because I think we'll get into that right here. Finding a champion. Sometimes instead of trying to influence an entire group, you get a relationship with a particular champion, and that champion is the one moving your story forward. Jerry, you had, when we were discussing what to talk about today, you had mentioned what you called building a peer structure.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through that?
So basically, like you said, you find what I found in this, you know, we've talked about, you know, you get order takers. Once you find an executive or even a senior leader at a level that you can sit down and talk to with the processes and how we're going to change their behavior, focus your efforts with them and then let them tell your story. I did some work where I'd work, you know, across the whole L&D structure in the company, and we were chasing our wheels. We hooked on to one of the VPs who loved what we did. We just kept working more and more with him, and his business got better, his profitability got better, his retention got better. And pretty soon his peer structure was such a way that people were coming to him like, why are you so successful and I'm so not successful? And then, well, go see Jerry. He'll take you through the process. You know,
Yeah.
so that peer structure is finding that champion, latching onto it, and then let them be your marketing and salesperson for you internally.
They're your voice, right? Bruce,
Yes.
you've got a good comment here. You found sitting in on the C-suite meetings allowed you to see and understand what they consider to be important, and then you can adjust the training to match. Meeting one-on-one with those managers also helped me have friends in the room, which is exactly what we're talking about here. Finding that champion
Yep.
who knows what you do, understands its value, and can be your evangelist in the people making some of the key decisions. How about you, Brandon? Do you have a scenario where a champion or a peer structure like Jerry describes is useful?
Yeah, and a lot of the organizations I've worked in, it's all built on relationship building, and that's how decision rights sometimes don't sit with an individual or a team, but you need to really influence and build those relationships, right, to get things done. So I think that's important. And the funny thing is, we're one of the few organizations that span across different areas of the enterprise, a lot of times the whole enterprise.
Yeah.
So it's really important, one, that the learning leader, the learning team has a strong perspective. So you really need to show up with what your take is on what needs to be done. And they're looking for, I had a leader once tell me, hey, we're looking to you to tell us what we should be doing in this space, right? And we need some bold ideas in this kind of thing. So I think having really a strong perspective, you need to deeply understand not the business itself, but how the work actually gets done. You need to really be in the work and know it to help you form that confidence that you've got a right perspective. And then you need to be able to lead with that. And I think there's art and science to what we do. And there's the same when you're interacting with stakeholders who have a pretty limited perspective on what their need may be. Or if you're at the C-suite where they have broad perspective, sometimes across, and you have to try to translate that into how does that correlate to performance or to whatever you need to make happen to reflect that, right? So it's sort of different language and conversation with different audiences, all in the same sort of driving towards the same outcome or impact that you're seeking, because you have confidence that you know what the workforce needs to be able to do. And I think that's what is really the difference between, candidly, the CEO can't really tell you what they need to do to be able to do. You're the one that really holds that card. The CEO or the C-suite, the ELT, whatever they may be called, they're directing and they're bringing vision and they're pushing the business in a certain way. And you need to be that truth sayer to say, okay, we can do this with the following, or we can't do this unless we do this. You know what I mean? You have to have that perspective. And I think that helps you build those relationships and influence. Just nodding your head and always saying yes and then trying to figure it out isn't going to work.
Yeah.
No, it isn't. And Jeffrey, you're pointing this out too. The sad reality is we in the L&D world struggle to find champions because many of them are spreadsheet people, right? Business people. We have to teach them and build that relation. It's a lot of work, but what I'm hearing, Brandon, from you and from Jerry, it's worth the effort. And Charles, Charlize, your comment here too about maybe you start a level lower, maybe directors and managers, right? And then they can be champions for you. I think that's an excellent comment.
I think it's an excellent comment because those are the folks living it day to day. They know how the work is actually getting done, not how it should be. And candidly, sometimes there's just a disconnect because of altitude. It just is what it is.
Right.
Sometimes the C-suite just doesn't know how things are getting done.
Right.
And so, yes, go to that manager, that director level, because they're the squeeze.
Yeah. And Brian and DJ, your comments are well taken, right? For most in the C-suite, it boils down to, are you making me money or saving me money?
Right.
And
Exactly.
I've been on company boards before, and that's a lot of times what the board is asking the C-suite to do. Simply make that, and so it's our challenge to oddly educate the C-suite on value. We're going to keep going in the interest of time because we've got a couple more things, and I really want to get to them. One is building the right team. And Jerry, I think you mean by this, your internal learning team.
Correct.
Yeah, talk about that just a
So
bit.
it's not just the instructional designers, it's having, IO psych majors, OD professionals, facilitators, project managers, marketing people. So you want to look at building the right team so that you can communicate and be part of that messaging to the C-suite. We talked a little bit, and Brandon, one of the skills we need on that team is people have to have good influencing skills or collaborative skills. And I had some mentors early in my career. We saw somebody in the chat say, well, we're order takers. That may be true, but what you want to do from an influencing standpoint is we know it's not all training related. What I was taught, by Joe Harless years ago is smile and say yes, and then go back and, look at Gilbert's model and try to figure out what you need, and then come back and say, okay, here's the training you asked for, because that's what they asked. But by the way, you need these other 5 components in order for it to succeed. So you want to make sure you got people that can communicate and work through it. It's a team effort. Do you have graphics people? Do you have story writers? Are you using tools like AI now to do the team?
Right.
So it's really a lot of things, and it's knowing all the skills. I see Scott put some of the skills. Yeah, those are
Yeah.
Are you consultative? Are you empathetic? Are you an order taker? So you want to look at building a team that can do it. And then I used to always tell, I had a team of 15 people working for me at one point, and I said, your job is to make me look good. My job is to make you look good. So share all the work to all the people. So it's not just the executives coming to me. They know my whole team and what they can go to.
I like that. Let's jump into tech stack. And right, the tech stack is getting easier because the tech and with the influence of AI and Miriam, you want to address, right, 15 years ago, you had the LMS and you had the stuff that came out of the LMS. And then some people had...
It's getting easier, but it's getting more complicated. Here at Ford, I've got an LMS, I've got an LXP, I've got an LMS, or I got an LCMS, and I got an LSM. So I've got at the high level, and then I've got 4 different development platforms, whether it's Articulate or Captivate or Camtasia, and then I've got access to 25 different content, whether it's Udemy or Coursera or Ingenuiti. There's all these things. So having the right tech stack, and then making sure that it's the most efficient tech stack, because with us being a federated ML, it's like a scavenger. I'm always finding people that want new tech, and they're going out and buy it because they have their own budget, but then it doesn't interface,
Right.
So what I try to
and
tell
then
people
then you throw AI on the top of that.
Yeah,
Jerry,
we've been
on all
using
of
AI
it
for almost a year now on our team, and people are worried about it. I'll tell you what, it's the biggest time saver for our team that gives us a lot more flexibility, a lot more creativity by using AI. And Ford's got our own AI tools internal to the company.
Sure.
So having tech is, so important, and I laugh too, because I've been in this field since the early 80s. I remember back in the late 80s when at the time computer-based training came out. That's going to replace all our instructors and facilitators. Guess what? The last industry report, I think we're still at 50 or 55% instructor-led training.
Sure.
So use the tools.
Well, I have used this in my MBA courses. I use the story of Henry Ford, right? These cheap, affordable black cars wiped out entire industries, horse and buggies, whip maker, and oddly, those people didn't go out of work. They retooled and they were able to do additional things.
It's interesting you mentioned Henry Ford, because we do some history in our new employee orientation, and somebody asked Henry Ford back, when they first started the assembly line, the company would have failed, because if they had asked him what they wanted instead of a car, he would have said they wanted faster horses.
Oh, yeah. And who wouldn't want a faster horse?
Right.
Yeah, Pablo, I think you're aggressive with L&D and AI can be covered, can be in an entire webinar, and Bruce is only one. I think probably a series, and every month, because it changes every month. All right, well, let's go on to the last one, and Brandon, I'll ask you to address this. How much, part of telling this story of your value is also looking at how much the industry, right, compared to what? So I did this and this was the result and this is the value. Are you ahead of the curve, behind the curve? Are you ahead of your competitors? Or how much benchmarking do you actually participate in?
I think it's critically important. I do a lot of benchmarking. I'm in a lot of forums and networks of just in our industry and our practice, because we are at a big inflection point, right? And a lot of what we've been talking about today, candidly, with, we've barely mentioned AI, which is a little bit of relief that it hasn't been all about that.
Right.
But candidly, we are kind of beyond the hype cycle a little. We may be entering many hype cycles as we continue down this journey. But we are at an inflection point where, since the tech tsunami started a couple of decades ago, that really started moving exponentially more rapidly than in the past. And during the health crisis from COVID, we've become more center stage, if you will, for helping to, obviously, business continuity, but to just drive employee well-being, all of these things, right, that are necessary, the reskilling and upskilling. I mentioned we're in a capability crisis. So we're at an inflection point where this is probably going to be seen as the single largest job transformation in human history. We're kind of on the cusp of that, right? AI is going to change a lot of things. We know that. We're just uncertain. And we're trying to sort of take the gambles and take the risks and figure things out as we go. And that's some of our tech stack problem, that we're looking at. But so benchmarking for us is critically important. It's an urgent need for us to know, like, hey, even like Jerry's talking about some of the things they're doing at Ford, what are some of the things that we're thinking about at Starbucks, and what are some of the things at other companies? So, many of us are, have the same kinds of issues. We've got labor and skill shortages. Employees are asking for different things. The sentiment is changing. Work has different meaning for people. And the cost to replace and onboard new employees is changing rapidly. So all these things, it's important to kind of hear from others to see what they're doing. I think this is advantageous for us to share and learn from each other. And we always have. I mean, it's kind of been a unique practice, the 20 some years I've been in it. We've always been kind of sharing and learning from each other. That's important. But a lot of times we are almost as segregated from what's going on as some of the C-suite folks can become. And so it's important to have those really close networks that you can learn and share from.
Yeah. David, we thank you for your comments. We wish you well in dinner time there in London. Before we go to that, though, Jerry, I want to give you a chance to address benchmarking. Let's go. There we go. Because I know you do a lot of this.
Yep. Always constantly benchmarking, look at it. And the one thing I tell people, I started benchmarking years ago, and people are like, well, benchmark our peer group or other auto suppliers. No, benchmark across the spectrum. Some people say you want to benchmark, you want to look customer service, maybe Amazon or Starbucks. You want to look at shipping, maybe it's Amazon or it's FedEx. You want to look at manufacturing. I know when I worked at Payless years ago, we looked at distribution, so we looked at the major trucking companies. So when you're benchmarking, look at what the function is, not necessarily the company or the industry. Some of the best benchmark, and be broad about it. Use what's available. ATD status of the industry, Training Magazine, SHRM. Like when I belong to the ATD forum, we have 60 plus companies there. We could do our own internal benchmark because we were all NDA not to share, and there was no other auto companies at the time, at the time I was with Consumers Energy. There were no other energy companies in the forum. I could pose questions to them and get honest answers. You'll find that benchmarking, if you go to other L&D professionals, you'll get stuff that you never thought you could get in terms of numbers and statistics and shared documents. So, keep it. And it just like I said, it's staying in front of the numbers every day. Benchmarking is a continual process because you don't want to wait for the industry downturn to start looking at it, because then is it leading or lagging?
Too late. Data? It's too late. It's too late.
You want to be leading data and stay on top of your benchmark, and keep it a running on update to your benchmark report. And I know we started this a couple times, and it's been successful at sometimes and failure. Just like a company does an annual report, you should do an annual L&D report every year. At the end of the year, which is you're benchmarking against the industry and what you're doing, so that your executives know, hey, they're not just waiting for us to come and ask what we're doing well. So,
great. Well said. Let's move on to the last slide. We have another webinar coming up. If you want to use the QR code, you can sign up for it. It's the power of learning science and how to improve your training outcomes. So with that, folks, we are at the end of our hour. Jerry and Brandon and Miriam, I want to thank you for an excellent conversation. And I've gained a ton of insight here, and so grateful for you sharing the gift of your time and sharing the gift of your insights. So I wish everyone a good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world. And we look forward to connecting with you soon. We will be sending out a recording of this, an evaluation form, and then a recording of this in the next day or two. So,
Okay. Thank you all.
Fantastic.
all
Thank
right.
you for
Thanks,
having me.
everybody.
Thank you so
Appreciate it.
much.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.